Peace on Earth. Ethan Indigo Smith here, the Philosopher, Stoned, where we discuss the esoteric and the exoteric of all subjects, metaphysical and political. We leave no stone unturned. So, 1984, we're going to discuss a couple of esoteric and exoteric ideas that one can read into 1984. You don't necessarily read it, but you can read into it. 1984 begins on April 4th, 1984. 4-4. And Winston Smith is the main character. An alternative title for the book 1984 by George Orwell that was considered was The Last Man in Europe. So you could consider Winston Smith as an individual and one of the last uninstitutionalized individuals in Europe, so he might have thought. He obtains a copy of what is known as the book within the book. And this book sets forth that there are three types of people in the world, quite plainly: the high, the middle, and the low. Now, throughout the rest of the book, not necessarily the book that the last man in Europe reads, that is supposed to present a solution to the problem of oligarchical collectivism. Throughout the rest of 1984, George Orwell refers to there being a similar three types of individuals: the inner party at the top, the outer party above, the proles, the proletariat called the proles. In the story, that being the vast majority of people without any say and without any power. And then there is also an elusive, whispered, subtle, covert, possible fourth group. As with so many stories, theories, and philosophies, there is an overt three types and an unsaid fourth type. And the fourth type is the Brotherhood. And they are said to be the people that are looking to free the proletariat from the control of the inner party and the outer party. And the proletariat are essentially under many different types of restrictions and repression. And they're under a restriction of language. They have an ever shrinking language. And language is a key to one's perception, one's thinking, one's consciousness. They had a shrinking language. And they also had restrictions on information. Not only were they not getting much information pertaining to reality or philosophy for that matter, but they were getting a lot of lies. So restriction on language, restriction on information, and restriction on relationship and movement. And of course, most overtly, restriction of resources, food even. So everyone is under a very repressed and restricted mindset in the story, and this leads to the understanding that in war, each war is an internal war and an external war. It's overtly an external war. In one state, theoretically one state going to war against another state externally. But it is further an internal war on the internal competition of the leadership, on the costly, whatever they leadership might perceive, costly aspects of their society, usually being what we just addressed: freedom of movement, freedom of language, information, and so forth. And then separately, restriction of resources, because all of these other restrictions can be addressed by the First Amendment. We can solve these by supporting the ideas in the First Amendment, rather, which of course is made up of the five freedoms, which I write about in the Complete Patriot's Guide to Oligarchical Collectivism, in homage to Orwell, and I got a lot of other esoteric ideas in there. So the First Amendment can really address a lot of the allegorized ideas in Orwell's 1984. But the real harsh oligarchical collectivism, which some oligarchical collectivism is maybe not so steep, right? Some oligarchical collectivism might be flattened by having a square deal, right? Uh, but most formations of institutions are pyramidal, with a few at the top and everyone else under various aspects of pressure. So, being the philosopher, comma, stoned, maybe I'm the only hippie to think such things, but the battle of resources is also, we can see as an internal war, and Orwell depicts it as the last man in Europe, Winston Smith, trying to obtain chocolate, coffee, food for that matter. And we see also the internal war and potential and confusion resulting from such, in the story where there's a bombing that Winston Smith experiences, and he relates how they don't know where it's coming from. Could it be from the supposed enemy, or could it be from the supposed, state that they live under, protector? So, one of the best ways to bypass restriction of resources, and all war results in restriction of resources, either indirectly through the production of the means of war, or directly during the war when things are, put forth towards the war effort rather than people. So the ultimate resource production is going to be to grow it. And yes, the ultimate resource on the planet is marijuana, cannabis, hemp. And it's restricted all over the world. There's a steepness to the oligarchical collectivism, or the institutionalization, that is all around the world. So the biggest way to deter oligarchical collectivism actually might be to legalize it and make the marijuana laws as blank as any other produce law, right? As basically, there shouldn't be no regulation on this stuff, and it may be the solution to all resource constraints, because there's not one resource that cannot be produced with it that is not high grade. You have high grade food, nutrients, you have the potential for high grade building materials of anything, packaging, clothing, food, clothing, shelter, right there. So if we want to solve what is an internal war, we need to produce resources, and cannabis and hemp are one of the most viable means towards resource production without having to harm the means of people obtaining the simple things in life. You don't have to mine, refine, and burn the stuff like petroleum sourced products and etc. So it's really the best resource there is. So to counter what Orwell depicted in 1984, the oligarchical collectivism that he put forth and showed us that could be anywhere, but he showed through the allegory of communism at the time, is to promote all the five freedoms of the First Amendment and the resource production potential that is in cannabis hemp. Peace on earth.